Hello, and welcome to this presentation focused on media training from Listos, California. We're going to spend the next few minutes helping to better prepare you for working with the news media to communicate your message to your audience. First, we're going to start by telling you about Listos, California. Every Californian, regardless of age, ability, income, or language, deserves culturally competent education to prepare for wildfire, flood, earthquake, drought, heat wave, and other disasters. Thanks to a continuous investment of public funds by Governor Gavin Newsom and state lawmakers, Listos, California engages in a statewide network of community-based organizations, tribal governments, and community emergency response teams across the state to boost resiliency, provide accessible in-language information, and advance a new culture of disaster preparedness. Anchored at the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, also known as Cal OES, since 2019, Listos, California has succeeded in reaching millions of Californians who otherwise wouldn't have access to life-saving emergency preparedness information. Providing tools to help vulnerable Californians not only survive, but also thrive post-disaster is what makes Listos, California so vital. Please visit listoscalifornia.org for more information. Before we go further, it's worth spending a second talking about the theory of effective communication. Simply put, if you want to communicate effectively, you need people to care about what you're communicating to them. Sort of like catching fish. You need a hook with the right bait or a very large net. So, let's teach you how to fish. So, to keep things simple, we're going to focus this training on 4 key objectives. The first, to grow your understanding of the media. The second, messaging and preparation. 3, interview strategies and tactics. Think of it as like tips and tricks. 4, I'm going to teach you how to practice and prepare yourself with the skills to do a great interview. Now here's a little bit more about how we'll learn these objectives. We'll continue to go back to this slide throughout the presentation. By the end, we hope you will be able to effectively use the media as a partner to tell your story to your audience to impact positive change in your community. So let's jump into the first top left box, grow your understanding of the media. So remember what I said about piquing the interest of an audience being key for communications? Well, we developed this slide to help show what the media, journalists, producers, news directors, etc., all would find interesting enough to cover as a news story. We need to start here because what we find interesting may not be what reporters find interesting. So if we want reporters to cover our issues, we need to do our best to fit our story or event into, quote, the perfect news story. Here are 5 elements to a perfect news story. Great, so now you know the 5 elements of the perfect news story. So how can we make it easy for reporters to cover our issue? Well, first is the hook. Basically the last slide, but summarized into a sentence or 2. We need to make the story simple to understand. We want to provide reporters with as much as possible in as simple a way as possible. We want to provide access, quotes, visuals, things as simple as a printed map and clear indications of where to park go a long way. Written quotes, simple fact sheets, graphics, all of these help. The other thing that I can't emphasize enough is timeliness. Not just the story you are telling, but in your communications with the journalist. Look, they're often under immense time pressure, on deadline as they call it, to get stories filed. Do whatever you can to help them meet their deadlines. Okay, so that was the 30,000 viewpoint of the media. Now we're going to get into the next step, which is messaging and prep. We're going to start on helping you understand how to develop your message. Again, we're using the media as a megaphone to reach our intended audience. The media is not the audience itself. So when we speak through the megaphone that is the press, it's very important to make sure the words we say are clear and concise and on message. So what is a message? Put simply, a message is the key takeaway for your audience. The way we deliver those takeaways matter for the audience absorbing the information. There's a great interview that then President Obama gave to ABC News at the start of his second term. In reflecting about his first 4 years in office, he said the biggest mistake of his first term was not being a good enough storyteller, explaining that he needed to better communicate to the American people why the policies he was pursuing mattered. Same is true for us in the emergency preparedness community. We need to do a better job of telling the story about why this matters, not just giving the public facts about why it's important to prepare. So before you do an interview with the press, focus on spending a few minutes developing narrative stories that help humanize or personalize the messages of preparedness that you're trying to convey. You can focus on these 4 elements up top here. What's the end goal? Make sure it's concise. Make sure that it has relevance to the audience and that it's easy to understand. The reason we have this slide is to show that not all types of interviews are the same. Know who you're going to be speaking with. Is it on the phone, in person? Is it live? Is it live remote? Each of these present different opportunities and challenges. But in order to take advantage of these opportunities and to avoid the potential pitfalls, you need to have done your homework in advance. Know what you're walking into. So ask questions of the reporter or producer in advance. Follow these 3 steps. The order doesn't matter here, though one could make an argument that the 3rd item is the most important. If you don't have a clear goal for the interview, then maybe it's not worth doing. By defining your goal, you can drive your message. You can then also do informed research on the reporter or producer you'll be working with to better understand how you can shape that message to help them cover your story in the best possible way. So that's a lot. Let me give you an example. So if you're working with Ron Lin, who's a reporter for the LA Times, you will know that he's an expert reporter on earthquakes. He knows them inside and out. So if you're talking about an example of something that happened in Loma Prieta, for example, you could say something like, quote, as you mentioned in your story about the upper deck of the Bay Bridge collapsing and people being stuck walking from the middle of the bridge, one of the things our organization encourages people to do is to carry a pair of walking shoes in their cars at all times, because nobody wants to walk 5 miles through rubble in high heels or barefoot, end quote. So this will help Ron better contextualize your message of, quote, on-the-go preparedness. Now you've personalized the story to the reporter, humanized it a bit, and used core messaging about being prepared away from home and work. Okay, that was the high level on messaging and interview prep. Now let's move on to interview strategies and tactics, the real nuts and bolts of this training. Okay, we have several parts to guide you through the interview itself. This is a summary slide, so the 3 parts of an interview, the before, the during, and the after. Before, you want to reach out to your organizational leadership, make sure they're aware that you're going to be doing an interview with the reporter. You don't want to catch anybody off guard. 2, you want to work through the difficult questions and prepare answers. We want to prepare the messaging like we discussed in some of the prior slides. And then during the interview, you want to be relaxed. You want to keep your responses short, but not too short. We'll go over some of that in a few slides. You'd like to establish a rapport, so it's more of a conversation with the reporter. 3, you want to avoid making statements you're not sure of. So don't guess, know what you're talking about. And then you want to always refer back to your messages to reinforce what you're saying with data. And then at the end, after the interview's over, you can ask if they have any further questions. You can always offer to review the story for accuracy. And something I always recommend is you can ask about the timing of publication or when the story will air. One other thing I like to say is you should always be ready for a question that most reporters ask, which is, quote, is there anything I didn't ask but should have, end quote. It's a great and common question from reporters. And the answer should never be, nope, you asked all the right questions. The answer should always be, a pivot back to your main message. Even if you already discussed it, use this prompt to go back and say something like, yeah, we talked a bit about it, but the key takeaway for your audience really should be XYZ, whatever your message is. Okay, a few more details of the interview itself. The key thing for me is to get your message out first. You don't want to wait for a particular question to deliver your message. So it's almost like as the interview starts and the reporter says, thanks, Joe Smith. We appreciate you having us on. I would respond if I'm Joe Smith by saying, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about X. And X is my message. So you really just get to it immediately. So somebody wise once told me that before going into a job interview, you should have 3 to 4 personal anecdotes that you'll be able to apply to pretty much any type of question you get asked by a job interviewer. The same thing applies to press interviews. You should always have some anecdotes ready to go to explain your core messages, to make the story of the information you're trying to convey relevant to the public. The way you want to do that is you want to keep it short and relevant. You definitely don't want to fill the silence. And you want to use those examples that resonate and impact the public. So this slide speaks for itself, and I hope you won't be in a tough interview situation. But if you ever find yourself facing a tough question from a reporter, a gotcha question, don't repeat the question in your response. It makes it too easy to pull the bad quote. For example, if a reporter asks, quote, "This seems like a great program and it will save lives, but don't you think it costs way too much for the return on the investment?" End quote. Your answer shouldn't start with, "It costs too much, but," in fact, it should start with, quote, "We're focused on results, and in our line of work, that's saving lives." You see the difference there? The second piece of this slide is also important. I really encourage you to use your organization's name every time, not say we or I. This makes pull quotes for print as well as TV and radio, but especially for TV and radio, a lot easier and a lot better and a lot more relevant. So here are the 4 things you can do in an interview to be successful, just put together graphically. You have to listen, then pause. Think about what the question was. Think about how you want to answer, then respond. And then shut up. Stop talking. Reporters are trained to leave awkward silence. The reason for that is the interviewees will oftentimes fill that silence with stuff that maybe they shouldn't say. So don't say it. Just say your message and move along. So a lot of times we work with folks who are nervous about doing interviews because they're concerned about being misquoted by the press. So we built this slide to help show you ways to avoid this happening. So in the first box, the top left one, you want to give them the facts and then tell them the facts. That can be reversed too, unless it's a live interview. The key is that everything you say that you feel is important can be communicated in writing too. So send an email or give them a handout. The second box, click, clack, repeat, and the third box, click, clack, follow up, are similar. This is relevant for phone interviews in particular. If you hear a reporter typing while you're talking, odds are they're taking notes because what you're saying at that moment is important to them. So make a mental note or a physical note about that moment and then follow up with an email after, clearly articulating those points you made verbally. Same goes for an in-person interview. If you see a reporter taking a note on a notepad, go ahead and send them that information about that point later. That's sort of like the click-clack follow-up. Next box, right below that, called "Now What Did I Just Say?" That's sort of an aggressive thing that I would say to my 13-year-old before leaving him at home for an hour. You don't want to leave a reporter with that impression, but you work on complex issues with lots of subtlety. So it's fair and appropriate that after you get done explaining something complex, you can take your turn asking the question of the reporter by saying something like, Look, I know that was a lot from me, but it's super important to make sure the subtleties are not lost. So do you feel like you got it? Oftentimes the reporter will answer yes, but sometimes they'll say, maybe, can you further explain this issue? Take that opportunity. So that leads to the big box. If it's a print interview, you can offer to review anything for the reporter as long as they go through their editing process. Make it clear you're not looking to editorialize, but rather just make sure that they got the facts right. Okay, so the bottom right box. This is less relevant for Listos related work, but I would be remiss in not including it here. If there's some very controversial or legally dicey issue you are discussing with a reporter, you can always ask if they're okay with you recording the interview too. You can do so on an iPhone or an Android. Reporters in California will always ask if it's okay for them to record the interview too. Why? Well, because they have to. California is a two-party consent state, meaning it's illegal for anyone to record an interview without first receiving permission from the other party. I'd recommend that you avoid recording unless there's some legal counsel advises you otherwise. Okay, so we don't spend a lot of time on on-camera tips in this training because, quite frankly, TV interviews are the least common of all interviews. But I do want to focus on four main tips for on-camera interviews. And they're mostly self-explanatory, and you can read them here. But the one thing I do want to do is pause for the bottom left item. So the short answer between the difference between what to do in a live versus a recorded interview is if it's a recorded interview and you misspeak or you think you could say something in a more concise way, ask the reporter for another take. 99 out of 100 times they will oblige because they want the best cut as well. Of course, you can't do that if you're live with Wolf Blitzer, but that's very rare. Okay, so this slide's way more fun in person, but we're not in person, so I'll cover it for you. So what do you do when you get a cold call from a reporter? Well, I like to say you say thank you for the call, right? You appreciate them taking an interest in your issues. And you ask them what they're interested in learning about. And then you ask them what their deadline is. And then you say, can I call you back? You want to be on your footing for the interview, not on theirs. So take 30 minutes, clear your head, go for a walk, get outside, get a cup of coffee, get a cup of water, whatever it is. But clear your head, get your messaging ready, talk to your communications team if you have one, and then go ahead and re-engage and call them back. You definitely want to do it soon. You don't want to wait till the end of the day. Ideally, it's relatively quickly, but again, it's on your time. Second question, what's the difference between an official interview and an unofficial interview? I like to say there's no difference. Anytime you're talking with a reporter, producer, or a member of the news media, you should assume that what you're saying is on the record, meaning can be attributed to you by name for print or on the air. Third, how can you be a better media guest in 3 seconds? This is kind of a fun one. The answer is take 3 seconds before you respond. Use that time to think about your response and messages. This will definitely reduce the ums and ahs and make sure you are more clear in your response. Okay, hopefully that was helpful. Now we're going to teach you some tricks to stay on message. So this slide, again, speaks for itself. There are some common phrases you can use to get back on message. I particularly like the bottom left one the best, because when a reporter goes back and listens to the recording of the interview, they'll know exactly when to focus on your message. It's almost like when a cinematographer claps the slate in a film production. So natural disasters are very emotional and create a lot of drama and a lot of interest. There can be occasions where reporters or journalists get especially pushy in an interview setting. So they're not necessarily likely to occur, but I still want to provide you with some of the tools that you can use to kind of, quote, get out of jail free. So these are 4 examples of ways to avoid responding to certain prompts from reporters. Okay, so you understand the media now. You understand how to develop a message, how to prepare for an interview, and then you know what to do before, during, and after an interview takes place, right? Well, maybe not. Let's go ahead and practice it. So here's the time where if we were doing this presentation in person, I would work with all the participants to practice the skills we discussed in the presentation. We can't do that, obviously, but you can try. Try out these tools with your kids, your spouse, parents, or neighbor, and have them role play the journalist. Notice I didn't list coworker. This is key because coworkers are hip to the jargon and inside information that you may use. It's important to practice your messaging and delivery on people not familiar with the minutia of your work. Set up a camera or use your phone to record audio. Spend some time reviewing and reflecting. Have fun with it. We're now at the end of the presentation. On behalf of Cal OES and Listos, California, thank you for working to better prepare California.